It always begins with a subtle shift in perception. He doesn't see you for the landscape you are, weathered and unique, but as the fertile ground he envisions. You feel it in his gaze, that nascent idea taking root. Is it admiration or a blueprint unfolding in his mind? You believe you're witnessed, but you're merely a stage being set, awaiting his narrative, his carefully constructed drama, where you are but a player. But the narrative isn't about you. It rarely is. And Friedrich Nietzsche, that relentless explorer of the human condition, he understood this with a clarity that bordered on brutal. Not with comforting platitudes, but with the stark pronouncements of a philosopher who dissected the very will to power that drives human desire. Nietzsche dedicated his life to understanding the masks we wear, the roles we inhabit, often unknowingly, and he unearthed a profound, often unsettling truth about men. They don't simply connect with women, they often fall for the potential of women, the idealized image, the reflection of their own yearning. And the most insidious part? Many are utterly unaware of this internal process. You might believe he's drawn to your essence, but what often captivates him is the phantom he's conjured in his own psyche, a carefully curated figure designed to fulfill a void within himself. And when you deviate from his internal script, he doesn't rewrite the story. He seeks a new actress. Nietzsche termed this internal projection the eternal feminine, the archetypal image of womanhood that resides within the male psyche. And when this archetype is unexamined, idealized, or clung to rigidly, it becomes a demanding phantom. It becomes the unseen force that compels men to seek out echoes of this ideal, often overlooking the genuine connection before them. It fuels possessiveness disguised as devotion, control masked as care, and expectations that burden rather than uplift. Nietzsche didn't romanticize this. He saw it as a form of self-deception, a state where the man, lost in his own internal landscape, fails to truly see the woman before him. And women, you often become unwitting participants in this drama, mistaking intensity for intimacy. You confuse being desired with being truly known. You mistake being elevated onto a pedestal with being understood in your messy, authentic reality. You believe his fervent pronouncements of your uniqueness, when in truth, you might simply be the latest vessel onto which he projects his unfulfilled longings, a role he's been unconsciously casting for years. And when the illusion inevitably shatters, when the weight of his expectations becomes unbearable, you're left feeling suffocated, misunderstood, and perhaps even guilty, wondering where the genuine connection went astray. But the genuine connection was never fully established. You were primarily interacting with a reflection of his inner world. Nietzsche argued that the path towards authentic connection lies in what he called self-overcoming, the arduous, lifelong process of confronting and integrating the fragmented aspects of oneself. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Many men avoid this journey entirely. They've been conditioned to seek completion in another, to find their value in the gaze of a woman. And as long as they do, they will remain trapped in this cycle of projection and disappointment, forever seeking a reflection that can never truly satisfy. Self-overcoming isn't a weekend retreat. It's a relentless excavation of the self, demanding a confrontation with the vulnerabilities, the insecurities, the unacknowledged needs. It requires a turning inward, a cessation of blaming the other for not fulfilling an internal void. Because Nietzsche understood a truth that many men resist. True strength isn't found in external validation. It's forged in the crucible of self-acceptance. Your worth isn't earned through her admiration. It arises from standing firmly in your own being, awake, responsible, and whole. A man who has wrestled with his own internal projections cannot be easily swayed by idealized images. He is no longer a puppet dancing to the tune of his own unexamined desires. He becomes the architect of his own connections. Nietzsche observed that a significant tragedy of modern men is not their loneliness, but their willingness to contort themselves into whatever shape they believe will elicit approval. You call it compromise, you call it affection, you call it making her happy. But Nietzsche saw a different dynamic at play, a form of self-negation. He warned that men who neglect their own inner development become slaves to their own projections, bending themselves like pliable reeds to the whims of an internal ideal that often bears little resemblance to the actual woman before them. You cease to be yourselves and become echoes, mirroring her perceived desires, anticipating her needs, performing a role until the authentic self fades into the background. And women, consciously or unconsciously, sense this. That very pliability, that eagerness to please, which you believe will foster connection, can paradoxically erode attraction. Why? Because the feminine spirit, Nietzsche might argue, is drawn not to the predictable but to the authentic, the grounded, the man who possesses his own inner landscape, boundaries intact. The moment you become entirely predictable, without your own distinct contours, you don't become more endearing. You risk becoming indistinct, easily taken for granted. And yet, the paradox persists, trapping many men in this cycle. The fear of solitude often outweighs the discomfort of inauthenticity. The prospect of losing her can feel more terrifying than the slow erosion of himself. But Nietzsche posited that true freedom arises from embracing that solitude, from confronting the desert within. He wrote that self-overcoming requires a form of internal death and rebirth, allowing the inauthentic layers to fall away so that the genuine self can finally emerge. But let's speak a truth often left unspoken. This journey of self-overcoming can feel profoundly isolating. As you shed the inauthentic layers, you begin to perceive the underlying dynamics of human interaction with a stark clarity. You recognize the roles people play, the masks they wear, the subtle manipulations employed to maintain a sense of control or validation. And when you attempt to articulate these observations, you might be met with resistance, defensiveness, even accusations of being cynical or detached. But you are not the problem. You are the mirror reflecting uncomfortable truths. And people often recoil from a reflection that challenges their own carefully constructed illusions. Nietzsche understood this resistance, this human tendency to cling to comforting narratives even if they are ultimately limiting. And women, Nietzsche might observe, are often socialized in ways that can inadvertently reinforce these dynamics. They might be encouraged to seek a strong partner, an external figure to provide stability or fulfillment, without necessarily being encouraged to fully cultivate their own inner strength and self-reliance. This can inadvertently perpetuate the cycle of projection and expectation. And here you stand, perhaps believing you can be the exception, the one who finally breaks through her projections, the one for whom she will finally see the real you. If you simply try hard enough, prove your worth relentlessly enough. But projection operates independently of your efforts. It is an internal mechanism, and until both men and women awaken to this dynamic, they risk perpetuating cycles of unmet expectations and disillusionment, each blaming the other for a script they are both unconsciously enacting. And here lies a poignant irony. The woman who once saw you as her ideal might one day perceive you as a disappointment, not because your core self has fundamentally changed, but because you inevitably failed to embody the idealized image she projected onto you. And she might not even consciously understand this shift in perception. This psychological disillusionment, Nietzsche might argue, is almost inevitable when the foundation of the connection rests on projected ideals rather than authentic presence. You didn't deceive her. You simply couldn't sustain an illusion crafted in her own mind. You were never truly that phantom to begin with. And the resentment that follows is often directed not at your genuine flaws, but at the shattering of her internal fantasy. Nietzsche wrote that individuals will go to great lengths to avoid confronting their own inner landscapes. And nowhere is this more evident than in romantic relationships. Both individuals often enter these connections not as fully realized beings, but as carriers of unmet needs and unacknowledged wounds, seeking solace or completion in the arms of another person they may barely perceive beyond their own projections. You call it love. Nietzsche might call it a mutual seeking of external validation. And like sleepwalkers, the pattern repeats, each hoping this time the outcome will be different. But it rarely is until the fundamental question is asked, what role am I playing in this recurring dynamic? It's tempting to place blame externally, to label the other as the architect of disappointment. But Nietzsche would challenge you to look inward. Why did you allow yourself to be cast in that role in the first place? The man who avoids confronting his own internal voids, his own unfulfilled longings, is often susceptible to becoming a vessel for another's projections. You are not merely a victim of circumstance, you are a participant, often an unconscious one. You chose to embody a role, to play a part in someone else's internal drama. Because confronting your own internal emptiness can feel far more daunting than inhabiting a pre-written script. And this is the point where many will resist this message, where the comfort of familiar patterns clashes with the responsibility of self-inquiry. Nietzsche offered no easy fixes, no simplistic formulas for relational success. He presented the demanding, lifelong task of self-examination, of confronting the internal narratives that shape your desires and expectations. That internal voice that whispers your incompleteness without another's validation will resist this introspection fiercely. But Nietzsche's philosophy suggests a more profound truth. The individual who can stand authentically in their own being, without the need for external approval or validation, is the one who is truly free. Free from the tyranny of projections, free from the endless performance of roles, free to connect with others from a place of genuine selfhood. And when that inner freedom is cultivated, the dynamic shifts. You don't become cold or detached. You become real, grounded in your own truth. And paradoxically, this authentic presence can be deeply compelling to others, not because you need them, but because you are yourself, fully. And you observe the dynamics of connection not with bitterness but with understanding. You recognize that others too are navigating their own internal landscapes, their own projections and expectations, and the work of awakening is ultimately an individual journey. You cannot force another to confront their own illusions. You can only embody your own truth so authentically that you become a living testament to the possibility of genuine connection, a mirror reflecting the potential for self-awareness in those who are willing to look. Many may turn away, but a few, the rare and courageous, will recognize the reflection and perhaps even be grateful for it. And that, Nietzsche might say, is the distinction between being desired for a role and being respected for the authentic self. And when that moment arrives, when the need to perform fades, a subtle shift in the dynamic of your interactions becomes apparent. Others may feel a sense of unease in your presence, even if they cannot articulate why. The weight of your authenticity can disrupt their own carefully constructed realities. Nietzsche cautioned that the self-overcoming individual is often met with societal resistance labeled as unconventional, perhaps even arrogant. But the underlying truth is often more profound. You have become less susceptible to manipulation, less easily defined by external expectations, because you see through the superficial layers. And the irony is that those who once sought your validation might now resent your self-sufficiency. Those still clinging to idealized notions of connection might misinterpret your authenticity as emotional unavailability or detachment. But what they often perceive is the erosion of their ability to project their own needs and expectations onto you. You have stepped off their stage, and without a pre-written script, they may feel lost in the interaction because you have ceased to be a character and have become an individual. Nietzsche might have observed that what ancient cultures attributed to divine influence, modern psychology often labels as neurosis. And the relentless pursuit of external validation, he might argue, is a form of spiritual sickness, a refusal to embrace the self. When expressions like, "I'd do anything for you," or "you are my everything," arise, they might be interpreted not as profound devotion, but as a deferral of self-responsibility, a projection of one's own sense of self onto another. It's easier to make another the carrier of one's meaning and purpose, but the weight of another's unowned soul is a burden no one can ultimately bear. And when that burden is inevitably dropped, the feeling of betrayal can arise. Yet it is not a betrayal, but a necessary release. A confrontation with the truth that the work of self-discovery is an individual mandate. In that raw moment of clarity, the choice lies between externalizing blame or turning inward to embrace the challenging yet liberating path of self-overcoming. The temptation to join the chorus of resentment is strong, but Nietzsche's philosophy calls for a deeper engagement. The solitary, often uncomfortable, but ultimately empowering work of becoming whole within oneself. because the other you seek externally often reflects an abandoned aspect of your own being. Until that internal integration occurs, relationships risk remaining transactional performances rather than genuine connections. But when you embrace your own inner landscape, you cease to chase reflections. You stand rooted in your own authenticity, and from that grounded place, a different kind of connection becomes possible. You attract not those seeking a role to be filled, but those drawn to genuine presence. And the dynamic will be unmistakable. No demands for performance, no attempts to rewrite your script, no falling for an idealized image. Instead, a raw and real presence, not seeking completion, but offering companionship on parallel journeys. No masks, no projections, no games. And in that authentic meeting, the difference is palpable. Grand declarations give way to quiet understanding. The language of completion is absent because wholeness is already embraced. The need to be saved is replaced by the strength of self-reliance. Having faced their own shadows, confronted their own internal projections, and burned through their own illusions, both individuals stand before each other, not as figures to be molded, but as authentic selves, ready to meet. In that meeting, there is no desperation, no clinging, no performance. Only the profound and sometimes challenging beauty of truth. And that truth, Nietzsche might say, is the rarest and most potent form of connection, born not of lack but of freedom. The freedom to choose, the freedom to walk away, the freedom to stand together without illusion or fear. But be warned, the allure of the familiar performance is strong. The temporary validation of being seen as someone you are not can be seductive. The courage to dismantle those carefully constructed facades, to stand in your own vulnerability, can feel immense. Yet it is at the edge of that terrifying beauty that true selfhood awaits. And when that selfhood is embraced, the dynamic with others transforms. They cease to be the source of identity, the mirror for validation. They become partners on a shared journey, mirrors reflecting mutual growth, allies in the unfolding of life. And love arises not from need, but from a place of strength and authentic choice. Friedrich Nietzsche didn't provide a simple roadmap. He offered a profound challenge: to resist the temptation of external validation, to confront the internal projections that bind us, and to embrace the arduous yet liberating path of self-overcoming. To stop blaming the reflections and instead cultivate the authenticity of the self. For the individual who chooses themselves fully, unapologetically, relentlessly, becomes impervious to the fleeting allure of illusion. They cannot be controlled by fantasy, seduced by performance, or reduced to a character in another's narrative. They become the author of their own existence. And if this message resonates within you, let it not be another fleeting thought. Take a moment to acknowledge its truth. Share it with another who might be caught in the shadows, and continue the exploration. Your own awakening can be a catalyst for others to do the same. Let us strive to awaken one authentic self at a time.